Alrighty. You should all be able to see the chapter 3 PowerPoint. This chapter is all about lifting and moving our patients. Biggest thing here is making sure that we are safe as well as our partners and our patient, right? So to do that, we want to make sure that we're using good body mechanics when we are lifting. I know a lot of you have probably heard of good body mechanics before, whether it was, your high school gym class or just through life or whatnot. We're going to go through just kind of a quick review of what the proper lifting mechanics are going to be. So before we do any actual lifting, we want to look at the situation that our patient is in, look at our patient themselves, and look at our team. Observe everything and kind of figure out the best way to move that patient. A patient that's 90 pounds versus a patient that's 600 pounds, how we're going to have to move a patient out of that situation is going to be different, right? Depending on the weight of the patient. The other thing is if we've got 2 rescuers versus 4 rescuers, the best way to move the patient is going to change as well, right? So we want to consider the situation that we're in and the ability of our rescuers. Working in volunteer EMS especially, you may not have a partner that's super strong with you. And I don't know why I said volunteer especially. That's just across the board, right? Your partner may not be able to lift as much as you are, or it's possible that they've had knee replacements and they can't kneel down to lift the patient and might have those limitations, right? So we want to take those into consideration as well. And ultimately, it may require us to call in additional resources to help lift. So additional resources when we're lifting, oftentimes it's going to be the local fire department or law enforcement that will come onto your scene and help you lift that patient. Big thing here is know your own limitations personally. Know what you're capable of lifting safely by yourself and with your partners as well. If you do have something like a bad back or bad knees, make sure that you're aware of that and cognizant of it when you go to make these lifts with your patients. Communication is also huge. It's huge when it comes to lifting. We want to make sure that everyone is on the same page. This becomes more and more important when you add more and more people. Make sure that everybody knows what their job is, what the process is going to look like, and see if anybody has any questions about what they need to be doing. And then make sure that you're all lifting at the same time. Communication here, not only are we talking with our partner, but we should also be talking with our patient too. Involve them in the conversation. Make sure that, your plan is good with them, that they're not, scared about anything or don't have any questions about the process. It's also possible that they may have a good idea that might be a little bit better than yours, right? They know their house. Most houses have at least 2 exits, right? A front door and a back door typically. If you came in the front door and you want to go out the front door, but there's like a few steps out front, it might be better to use the back door because there might not be any steps. Maybe there's a ramp out there and you just need to move your ambulance around. So make sure you are involving the patient in the conversation as well. When we are actually lifting, we want to make sure that we're positioning our feet properly, shoulder length apart, good solid ground that we're standing on. We want to use our legs when we're lifting. We don't want to ever twist or turn, and then we don't want to compensate when lifting with one hand. So again, we aren't always in the picture perfect scenario where we're lifting these patients up. Oftentimes we're in weird situations where we're lifting with one hand, or maybe we aren't able to have our feet positioned appropriately. Just do your best to be safe. And again, remember that we can always call additional help if needed. We want to always keep the weight of the patient as close to our body as possible. That way it's keeping us in a good, safe position. Also, it's a little bit easier to carry a lot of weight if it's really close to you. We could all do that right now. If you take your textbook and hold it nice and close to your chest versus holding it straight out in front of you, eventually that textbook, even though, it's not super big, it's going to get really heavy really quickly, right? If it's farther away from you. When we're using equipment like stair chairs, when we're actually going downstairs, we want to make sure that we're using the power lift and power grip. So we're getting in that good stance, feet shoulder width apart, back nice and straight, using our legs to lift. And we're using the power grip. So you can see here in the image on the right that it's an underhanded grip. It's a little bit stronger than if we were to grip it overhand. Personally, and I'll show you this when we do our skills night, when we're using a stair chair, it works really well to do one hand underhanded, the other hand overhanded, because you do have to kind of constantly adjust the angle that the stair chair is at to make it work effectively. When reaching, we want to keep our back in a locked in position, avoid twisting, avoid reaching for more than 20 inches away from your body, and avoid any prolonged reaching when strenuous effort is required. So we want we want really kind of quick, simple lifts. We would always rather push than pull whenever possible. We want to keep that back locked in again, keep that body weight nice and close to you. So we're kind of starting to repeat things here. If the weight is below our waist, we want to push or pull from a kneeling position to avoid pushing or pulling overhead. You're more likely to get injured if you're pushing or pulling from an overhead position. And then keep your elbows bent and your arms nice and close to your side. There are different types of moves that we can do. You saw them listed here. We've got emergency moves, urgent moves, and then non-urgent moves. So emergency moves would be any situation where there is a hazardous scene, life-threatening conditions. We maybe have several patients that we have to get to, so we need to be quick with each of them. We can do something called the close drag. I don't recommend this. Oftentimes people's clothes will rip, tear, or the neck will come up too close and start kind of crushing their airway a little bit. So do be very careful if you're doing this. The next one is an incline drag. We always want to go head first with these. This method of kind of reaching under the patient's arms and grabbing their wrists, we actually use quite a lot, not necessarily to drag the patient. Oftentimes we have somebody else on the legs and we'll lift the patient this way, but it does work actually really well. This one is called a firefighter's drag. Even though I haven't been teaching for very long, every single class that I've taught has had at least one firefighter in them. And every single firefighter that I've had in my classes have all said that they have never used this before. So if you're a firefighter and you've used this outside of training, let me know. I'd be happy to hear about the experience of it. To me, it doesn't look like the safest way of moving a patient. If it's a situation where we can't stand upright in the building, then it's probably not a situation that EMS should be in. Yeah. Blanket drag. This is something that we do use a little bit more often, but with like a lift sheet instead of a blanket. If we've got a really heavy patient that we're trying to get out of, say, a bathroom and into a hallway or something like that, if they're on the ground, we try and put them on a lift sheet, and then we'll do small lifts all the way out to where we're trying to get, or we'll try and drag them a little bit or lift up their head and drag the blanket to get them where we need to be. You can also do a one rescuer assist and help walk the patient where they need to be, or you can do a two rescuer assist and again, help walk them where they need to be. And then we move on to our urgent move. So an urgent move is where we've got a patient that requires treatment that can only be performed if the patient is moved. So emergency moves are going to be really quick moves. An urgent move is pretty quick, but a little on the slow side. So we're going to be using things like backboards or scoop stretchers to try and move the patients, as opposed to just grabbing them and going. Non-urgent moves, this is where we have no immediate life threat. The patient can be assessed, treated, and moved in a normal way. So these are situations where we're going to be taking our time, making sure that the patient is as safe and as comfortable as possible, making sure that we are as safe as possible. Typically, we might, move some furniture out of the way or bring in like a stair chair, things like that to help assist us with the move. So we can use, most places now have power stretchers. Maybe you'll have a bariatric stretcher as well. Bariatric stretchers are weighted up to like 800 pounds or more. Normal regular stretchers are about I think it's like 725 for the Stryker. This is an example of a Stryker power cot. It is not a Stryker power load system. So you can notice here on the foot end, there's a battery in place. That battery raises and lowers these legs, which is really nice. This cot is a Furno cot. I have yet to see anyone in this area use a Furno stretcher. Most everybody uses Stryker, but the idea is the same. This one is power assisted as well. Big thing with the power Furno is that you can control each leg or each set of legs individually. So you can have the head get elevated or the legs get elevated. This is an example of a bariatric stretcher. There's a specific loading mechanism to help assist with the additional weight. Also, you'll notice that there are these long handles. That is so the providers can stand at a normal level with the cot being as low to the ground as possible to lower that center of gravity so it doesn't tip. Stair chairs are incredibly useful when stretchers can't be easily maneuvered. So just the standard Stryker power cot weighs something like 100 and some pounds, right? They're not light by any means, and they're pretty bulky and hard to maneuver in small areas. So stair chairs are really helpful in those situations where we need to maneuver through tight corners. Spine boards can also be helpful in carrying patients. Short spine boards aren't something that we use a lot. They used to use them more for like CPR, where you would put a board behind them if they were on a soft surface and then do CPR. Long boards, we do use these. Most oftenly, it's going to be with patients that just need to be lifted from one situation to the other. We don't use them a ton anymore for spinal immobilization. And we'll talk more about that in our trauma lectures. So this is an example of a Stryker stair chair. This actually is an older model now. They just came out with a new model that is a power system. So it's got like a battery and everything attached to it. I've heard some mixed results on actually using them. They're a lot heavier and bulkier. So students that have used them that are on the shorter side have a really hard time using them because they're huge in comparison. But this one is the one that we have at the school that we'll be playing around with, and it is fairly standard. Most services still have one of these, if not, all of their trucks loaded with one of these. Anything red on a Stryker product makes it move. So this red piece here in the back drops the tracks down, and then when you're going down the stairs, you're actually resting on the tracks, and it's kind of slowing you down a little bit and helps take the weight of the patient off of you. Here we've got an example of backboard devices. So these are long, rigid spine boards. We used to use them a lot for spinal immobilization. Since maybe the last 10 years or so, maybe a little bit longer than that, they've been doing more and more research that shows that these are actually harmful to patients if they're on them for an extended time. So most of the time when we use these, it's to go from the scene into the ambulance, and then we take them off the board in the ambulance. Other types of stretchers, we've got portable stretchers, scoop stretchers, basket stretchers, flexible and vacuum mattresses. So portable stretchers, think of like a military litter, where it's kind of like a soft stretcher. Scoop stretchers, I've got kind of an image of here. This is a scoop stretcher. This one's a Furno product. They come in a few different shapes and sizes. This one here is adjustable to height. And the idea is that the whole board breaks in half, so that you can scoop it around the patient, and then it'll click into place underneath the patient, and then you can lift them up. So this is really good for patients that have hip fractures. You don't want to be rolling them onto a board. You can just scoop them right up. This one is a basket stretcher, otherwise known as a Stokes stretcher. This is used for pretty much any sort of angled rescue, high angle, low angle rescues. These also, if you have the proper training, you can rig them to helicopters so that they can pull you up in helicopters like you see in the movies. Not something we really do. Flexible stretcher, so this one's soft. It's got like a rigid frame, but then just a soft backing to it. This one is a vacuum mattress. So think of it as kind of like blow-up mattress, but when you deflate it, it forms to the patient in a rigid kind of manner. So it is personalized to every patient. Big thing with these is I've seen them leak and then they're no longer effective when they lose that rigidity. So when we're moving patients, we always want to be aware of whether or not they have a spinal injury, and then keep that in consideration when we're determining what move we're going to use. If we're going to move urgently or emergently, we aren't usually taking care of their spinal precautions. We're just going because it's a life or limb situation. In our non-emergent moves, that's where we're putting them on backboards if necessary and putting seat collars on and taking precautions against them moving or harming their spine further. Patients with no suspected spinal injury, we can use some extremity lifts. This one is not one that I've seen often. However, if you turn this female provider around and face the patient, that's typically how this lift goes. Yeah, I know it's not how the book says you're supposed to do it, but in actuality, it's a little bit easier. You just unfortunately have one person going backwards, but it's a bit easier to hold and carry the patient that way. If the patient doesn't have any sort of spinal injury, we can do a direct ground lift. This is where we are just simply lifting the patient up off the ground and then moving them over to the cot or stretcher or hospital bed, whatever it is. If we have a patient that doesn't have any sort of spinal injury, we can do a draw sheet method from bed to cot or cot to bed. Oftentimes, if you're working for a transporting service, this is probably the most common one that we will use. The patient will be on, our cot, and then we'll drag them over to the hospital bed. So you just kind of roll up the side of the sheet so you have something to hold on to, and then pull the patient over onto wherever you're trying to go. I will say with that one, usually we try and have either 4 rescuers or 3 so that there's somebody else on the other side kind of helping guide the patient where they need to be. If we're ever transporting a patient that's pregnant or a patient that's actively vomiting, anything like that, we want to transport them in what we call the recovery position. This is going to be on their left side. Their left side is the recovery position. We can also put patients in shock in that position as well. We're no longer recommending that we're raising legs or lowering the head of the cot. That was the Trendelenburg position, and we're no longer recommending that you do that for patients. So transferring the patient to a hospital bed, again, it's usually set up like this where we've got 2 people on each side. Whoever is at the head of the patient when we're moving them is the one that's in charge. So here you can see we've got 4 people, so there's 2 people at the head of the cot. So who is going to initiate this movement? Well, typically, it's kind of an awkward staring contest until somebody says, okay, on my count, and then we move them on the count of 3. I think the book says that it should be the person on the receiving end that's doing the moving. But like I said, it's not always, I will say nurses tend to be rather aggressive and will, in a good way, and will be the one that says, okay, on my count faster than we will. But as long as it's somebody at the head, that's the right answer. You move them over onto the bed and then give your handoff report. So that chapter was relatively quick. I'm just going to stop my recording.